Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Reeve and Bloom Show. Myself, Jack Reeve and Benjamin Bloom, taking a look at all things football, what's going on in the world during lockdown, and just having a general chit chat. Mate, how are you? It's been a little while since we last spoke, and a lot has happened, hasn't there?
Yeah, a few work negotiations this end, and I think you've had the same, haven't you? And I don't know what's worse, Jack. My Twitter feed being full of football supporters moaning about football, and my Twitter feed being full of football supporters moaning about politics this weekend
Oh, I
seems to have
know.
taken over.
It's funny, isn't it? Because when sort of Brexit was getting to a close, we thought, what is the kind of the news outlets going to talk about? And then COVID came, and it's like, oh my goodness! In this whole Dominic Cummings thing, I mean, let's not get too political on here, but it's been a bit of a mess, hasn't it?
Yeah, and not to defend Mr. Cummings, but I think everyone's a bit unsure and a bit scared, and some people need somebody to love, but some people need somebody to lash out at sometimes. And I think Mr. Cummings has got the angst of a lot of people. But as you say, this is a football chat, not a political one. And please don't judge my political allegiances. I don't have any as far as this is concerned.
Yeah, the thing that I haven't quite understood. Like, he did what he did, just apologise, and people, even if he thinks he's in the right, just apologise, and people forget very quickly. Like, there would be a different person for people to be having a pop at in 2 days. But he's not apologising, and I'm sure it'll rumble on. But as most things are, they're forgotten rather quickly. We saw the Bundesliga happen. What were your kind of general sort of thoughts after a few games that have taken place now?
Well, I watched the very first Dortmund game, and it was weird for a little while, but I got used to it reasonably quickly. I'm sure you've been to reserve games and you've been to age representative games, and sometimes they're put in big stadiums and they're empty. I enjoyed it. I thought it was good to see everything back. I think we all got suckered into looking at the football when really the important thing was come Monday or Tuesday, and when they then test again, is there going to be some crazy outbreak? Unfortunately, like we hoped, the numbers were very low going in, and then there weren't any, discernible problems. When I say problems, like, obviously we appreciate any one person getting the disease is horrible, and that's bad. But we're talking about big picture, and under, even now we've done the Premier League testing, which I'm sure we'll talk about, under 1% positive, and it looked like the Bundesliga, Jack, just gave us a blueprint to say, right, to all these people, so what about the outbreak? What about this? What about the games ending 8-0 or whatever?
Yeah.
None of that happened, and as usual, the wonderfully efficient Germans showed us the way, I think.
Yeah, I was listening to Andy Brassel on Talksport yesterday, and he was kind of asked the question, what's the standard been like across all of the games? Because he's obviously a European football expert. He's watched pretty much all of the Bundesliga games. And I think he was quite right in saying the standard he's seen, and we've all seen, is far higher than he was expecting. And it goes to show, especially at the very top levels of the game, how finely tuned footballers are nowadays. They can go a couple of months, they can keep their fitness up and their diets and all of their kind of fitness regimes up, and still come back. And within a few days, few weeks of training, they're back to kind of where they left off. So I think that is less of a worry now, because, as you say, some people worried the standard would drop. And from a personal point of view, I think I'm now more excited about the possible return of football. I was very much against football returning under the kind of current climate. And I thought, until fans are back in the stadium, we should just, write it off, void the season, whatever that may be. And the first week of the Bundesliga, I was a little bit, cautious. I wasn't quite keen. The second week came around. I'm not quite sure if it was the sun was out. I had a beer. I saw Dennis Treveni banging one in from 20.
What a goal, by the way!
It was a great strike, wasn't it? And suddenly I'm really up for it again. And I think as the weeks go by and the more normal that the world feels again, shops are beginning to open, people are beginning to go back to work, I have now got that craving for football that I think a few weeks ago I didn't have. Is it the same for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I always, I try not to get into debates, but often end up getting into debates. And my standard, Jack, is always, what would a scientist say and what would stand up in the court of law? That's how I think you win or lose a debate. And the one thing that those two standards for winning a debate need is evidence. And no one had any evidence, did they, of, is this going to go wrong? Are all the players going to get infected? Are they all going to get horrible muscle injuries within minutes? And now we have lots of nice, not anecdotal evidence, actual statistical evidence and numbers. And also with the testing in the Premier League, what was it, 0.2% in the last test, and obviously that was probably not including the 6 that had tested the previous week. I would think they were still in isolation, but these are really, really low numbers, being asked to train in bubbles, and we're going to get a vote on contact training. And honestly, from the evidence I've seen, it looks safe.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned there about the kind of the teams going back to training. I've seen, the videos from Norwich only. I haven't really been watching other teams training in sort of isolation. I don't think that would quite do it for me. But it looks relatively okay. Like, I thought it was going to look really strange with players training on their own in little coned off squares. But I think the players will be quite happy to have returned as well, won't they?
Absolutely. And I mean, you always hear about, I don't know, Paolo Di Canio or Eric Cantona practicing on their own for an hour after everyone else has gone, and Frank Lampard with his spikes on. And you've got a guy at Norwich. I bet Timu Puki's most important training is with mannequins hitting the corner of the. Well, he seems to hit the corner of the side netting, doesn't he? Low on the floor. So they'll get stuff out of it. I think it's just you just need that week or two. It's going to be the same with retail and schools and garages. You need that week or two of, right, this is how safe or unsafe it is. And I'm going to say this as a quote, other people's words, but potentially safest working environment. I'm sure your job and my job, we're not all going to get a test and all of this before we go in. We're not going to be outdoors. We'll likely be in bubbles, but it's looking positive, isn't it? I shouldn't use that word positive or negative at the moment. It's looking good.
I saw a few comments on your channel from the last one of these we did, and there were a lot of people who were saying they worked in the construction industry or in supermarkets, and they were basically saying, and I can kind of understand, we've gone back to work, we haven't had testing, we're with members of the public every single day. How is that more safe than kind of footballers going back? And you know what, I kind of get it. As you say, testing has happened. They're going to be in very controlled atmospheres. As you say, it's probably one of the safer industries to be going back.
And why do they get the extra, Jack? Because you can't sell one of our commenters who works in Tesco's to Morrison's for 40 million quid, can you? So you can see why they are humans, but they're also massively, expensive assets to be able to move around, and they want to be kept safe and healthy in that respect. But the argument now starts to add up, and we've got this June the 15th thing of, if you work in Sports Direct, you're going back on June the 15th. So footballers are now not being asked to do anything that anybody else isn't being asked to do, and in probably a safer environment.
Yeah, definitely. Was there anything from the Bundesliga action you saw that you thought, this isn't quite the same? I know that it's very different without fans there, but anything other than the lack of fans that you kind of saw and thought, I'm not a fan of this?
Yeah, I don't know what you think about this. It'll be interesting to get your comeback. I think the propensity for a team to collapse in a game seems to be greater with this behind. It seems that you can knock a team's confidence right down. And I think a couple of things might happen. I'd be interested to see if you agree. We might get quick, bam, 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 3 goals in 10 minutes. And I think someone's going to come back and lose all their games. I don't know who it's going to be, but someone is not going to be able to cope with, this new situation. It's going to get in their head. And we all know with football teams, once the head's gone, your out of position before you've even started. You have the ball for 20 minutes, and the first time the other team goes in you're Ipswich 2018-19, aren't you? You know,
yeah.
So what do you think about that?
That's one of the things I'm most looking forward to. Like a Liverpool returning and just being useless. Like, how funny would that be? And also, Norwich could return and just be amazing. That would be.
But you could present this argument that Liverpool's all based on intensity and pressing, and the intensity is going to be less. Norwich is based on pre-prepared patterns that are done on the training ground. So you can argue that. No, we've done this move a billion times. Yeah,
massively. We've also got Tim Close, who's now fit. Onel Hernandez, who's now fit. Like that 2-month break we're still currently in. It's healed players. We've had, it could be exactly the thing that we needed. It probably won't be, but who knows? It's really fascinating. Yeah,
Jack, what are the Norwich fixtures like? Sorry, just to interrupt.
We've got a fairly favourable fixture list. We've got a lot of teams in and around us. We've got Manchester City on the final day. So, look, people were very much criticising me on the last video that we did, saying, how dare you say that it's all over for Norwich City? We're very much in this. I mean, a 6-point gap seems a lot to make up, but all it takes is, a run of 5 games without defeat, and suddenly you're back in it. It's the previous form that we witnessed completely goes out of the window, doesn't it? And suddenly it's a very open game again.
And you're totally right that you can't sit there now and judge a 6-point gap in this situation against a 6-point gap when everything just flowed through normally. Fans were in stadiums.
Yeah.
Every team didn't have 2 months off or whatever. So yeah, literally anything could happen. We'll be fascinated. One thing that the Bundesliga has shown is that the cream does still rise. I know you've got those 2 massively powerful, I suppose it's reasonably similar in the Premier League. You've got those 2 massively powerful teams who are able to stick 4 and 5 goals in. But down the bottom might be a bit different. Who knows?
Definitely. The other thing I've really loved, and I didn't think this would be a thing, when the ball hits the back of the net, it makes that really crisp sound, doesn't it? And you don't get that on the television with fans in the ground because the crowd noise sort of kind of muffled over it. But that sound of the ball hitting the net is just such a pure feeling. It's lovely.
And that is a great example, Jack, of someone finding a positive in a negative. You'd never be able to, unless someone's really got the microphones sorted out well and their sound mixed nicely and, someone's ripped one into the net. But you were on Twitter, you were quite annoyed with superstar turn Erling Haaland being a bit autistic. Sorry, I'm not using autistic in a negative sense, but with his one word. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that an elite footballer would be, on the autistic spectrum in terms of being able to repeat and being to obsess about football. I really don't mean to offend anybody who's got.
I know. My frustration with Haaland is, and it might not just be him. He's obviously rose to fame very quickly. He's still very young. He's a fantastic footballer. All of them things I do agree. And I was tweeted numerous times after that with the full interview. It was about 1.5 minutes. And there were some answers that went above sort of 5 words in respect. My frustration is, yes, he could be kind of socially awkward. That's fine. Like people are. He's a footballer. He's not like a personality. I get that. It just seemed very rude and it wasn't just one isolated incident. Every interview I've seen him in, he just seems to disrespect the journalists. And a lot of people were tweeting me saying, well, it's not his kind of job to come back with good responses to journalists. Footballers and the media are very closely intertwined. And if footballers disregard the media, disregard journalists, I can guarantee you they will start to turn on him. You treat the journalists well, they'll treat you well back. Usually, not always the case. And it was just kind of the smirk that he had after he was going off, and you could see him saying, bad questions to the media kind of guys at Dortmund or whatever. I think he needs to be trained. I think he needs to have a senior player go up to him and just have a word with him and say, look, if you don't start to tackle this soon, then it might become an issue. And if he really doesn't want to do them, let the media team just put someone else up for interview. I'm sure
they want him though, don't they?
it doesn't matter, I guess. Like, media teams have the kind of responsibility to put up who they want. Yes, in some players' contracts, they have obligations with the media to meet, but look, it just came across as rude to me. And I understand that there could be issues there. I understand that, footballers don't have to be,
Do you think it might be fun though, Jack? If you compare him to the two preeminent players of our generation, where you've got Cristiano Ronaldo, who's got this kind of it's sort of arrogance, but it's not really arrogance because he is actually the best. And then you've got Messi, who's standard footballer, who's a little bit boring. Do you think it might be quite fun if he reaches that level to have this like provocateur who's just a bit of a wind up?
The player I think he's most like is Zlatan at the moment. Like, Zlatan,
there you go, yeah.
Kind of get away with it, couldn't he? And he came across as rude most of the time, but he had the ability to kind of have that aura. I don't know. I just think it doesn't take much to have manners and just be nice to people, and it just seemed rude to me. If the journalists think that he's being nice, that's fine.
Looks just a hell of a player though, doesn't he?
Oh, phenomenal. Yeah. I'd definitely take him at Norwich.
Hey, I think you need to get behind all the Leeds fans in the queue, because they think because of the link, because he was born in Leeds and he's son of an ex-Leeds player, but then he'd also be son of an ex-Manchester City player by that, and Nottingham Forest as well. So yeah, there you go. I thought I just wanted to quiz you on it because I thought
I needed something to get angry about, didn't I? Like, football back, there's nothing to moan about, otherwise. So that was one thing to moan about. Sorry, Mr. Haaland. League One, what's going on? What's the latest with Ipswich?
Well, since we last spoke, we had the unholy alliance, didn't we? So when we last spoke, it was very much, nobody can agree, therefore everything's going to be kind of swept under the carpet. And then we had old mad Dara McAntony, him of the podcast and tweeting 100 times a day, saying, well, I've got a list of clubs that want to play on, and it's Ipswich and Fleetwood and Oxford, Sunderland, Pompey, one more. Oh, Peterborough, would be the sixth one, obviously. That seems to have not really gone anywhere. So they're at the point now where the EFL came out last week and said, right, this is what you're voting on. We're either going to curtail, and the season finishes on points per game. Therefore, Wickham jumped to 8th. Ipswich embarrassingly then dropped below Steve Evans' Gillingham into 11th position. The lowest finish since 1951, I believe. Ouch indeed, yes. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, Mr. Lambert. See if you can spin that one back any particular way. Did you know he used to play for Dortmund? I don't know if he's mentioned it, but there you go.
Actually, I want to quickly mention something about Paul Lambert. It was amazing. So I was driving yesterday in the car and had TalkSport on, and they were interviewing Paul Lambert. It was Max Rushton and someone else. I can't remember who it was. And they had Paul on the phone and they chatted about the Bundesliga and when he played for Dortmund and what's it like.
Did he play for Dortmund?
Yeah, I don't think he was there for too long.
They may or may not have won a European Cup when he was there. I'm not sure if he's mentioned it.
I think he's mentioned that a couple of times. Yeah. But anyway, they got through all the kind of generic questions and then they started going, Paul, like, how are you preparing for your co-commentary this weekend? You're co-commentating on the Bundesliga for TalkSport. Have you got your studio set up? Have you done all your research? And he was going along with it. He seemed a bit kind of reserved. And, Max Rushton was plugging these questions. What microphone have you got? Things like this. Anyway, answered all the questions, very polite, goes off the line. And then 10 minutes later, Max Rushton goes, do want to apologise. Paul Lambert isn't co-commentating. I've got it mixed up. But the amazing thing was, Paul Lambert was just going along with all of it. He was like, yeah, I've got my microphone and everything. He's not doing it. It reminded me of that. Can you remember that BBC interview when they accidentally got the taxi driver?
Amazing. In
the studio, and he acted like he was the expert for like Apple or something. He just kept going along with these questions that were nothing to do with him. It was amazing.
You can't budge Paul Lambert. He will not be caught out in a verbal exchange. But going back to what we were saying. So the vote is either on curtail and points per game and playoffs. No extended playoffs, which is what Dara and the Unholy Alliance wanted. Basically, where are Peterborough and Sunderland? That many teams go into the playoffs. It seemed to be that way. They're still moaning about it, but we're going to have the vote now, and you then start to figure out how people are going to vote. Dara McAntony and Marcus Evans and that lot are still arguing that for the bigger clubs it will cost them more money to refund season tickets and sponsorship deals than it will to stop. Unfortunately for them, with the way it's laid out, why, if you're Coventry, would you keep going? Why, if you're Rotherham, would you keep going? Yeah. You stop and you're promoted. Yeah. Why, if you're AFC Wimbledon, whoever's just above the relegation zone, you want to stop and you're safe, don't you? So, unfortunately, this seems to have put a lot of teams on notice to say, well, let's just stop. Yeah. And unless you're Tranmere and you've won 3 on the trot and you're 21st and you think you can get out of it, you want to continue. Yeah. Or if you're Peterborough and you're just outside the playoffs, or Doncaster, you want to continue. But let's just say there's not going to be the influences leaning on League One teams to continue that there will be leaning on Championship and I think we all know what I mean by that. Yeah. But there's 100 million reasons why the Premier League are going to be leaned on to, and then the Championship going into that. So it looks like, my hunch is it will be curtailed and you'll have Wycombe versus Fleetwood and Pompey and Oxford in the playoffs with Coventry and Rotherham. But then again, Joey Barton, out he comes and he says Rotherham have won the lottery. They had 6 of the top 10 to play. Their points per game would be the lowest of any automatically promoted team. So it'll run and run, but I think it's getting cancelled in the next couple of days and we'll go straight to playoffs. And sadly for Tranmere, they're going to go down on points per game with Bolton and Southend.
And so with that, with that way with the season finishing, does that mean that Peterborough wouldn't make the playoffs? Did you say
Peterborough would not make the playoffs? That
seems like remarkably harsh, doesn't it?
On points per game, they're not one of the top 6 teams in.
And are we saying that points per game and the weighted points per game system is the fairest way of?
It's unweighted, by the way. They're not going for the weighted. It's unweighted. I don't know what the rationale behind. Well, maybe they just didn't see enough significant difference and enough people would have. I think the argument is that the less amount of arbitrary predictive things that you put in the decision, the better. But if you're going to do that, just use the table as it is. But essentially, you still have that. Wycombe have the game in hand, and the stupid thing is, if Wycombe win the game in hand, they're literally on the same points in second. They go from 8th to second, and it's only the goal difference that keeps them out of the top 2. But no, Peterborough will cry foul. Sunderland miss out, won't they, as well? And so, who would have predicted no Peterborough, no Ipswich, no Sunderland in the top 6?
You'd have got very good odds on that bet at the start.
Well, you would know, yeah.
As a fan of a club who looks like the season will be cancelled, do you think it's going to be slightly odd for you that there's going to be, football leagues continuing across the world, but your team isn't playing? Does that feel slightly strange to you?
Well, we've made our bed, we've got to lay in it. Years of operational decisions that's put us in League One, Jack. That
this your punishment.
It seems like we've been punished for. I remember having this conversation with the great Harry from Bath. He's like, "What have we done in a previous life to deserve this last 15 years of whatever has happened?" No, it is what it is. Ipswich have lost 7 of the last 9 games.
I mean, that's Ipswich fans could see this as a blessing that you don't have to watch Paul Lambert football.
Well, and I did hear an interesting thing on Kieran's podcast. He's talking about David Moyes, Jack, and I know you asked me about the Lambert contract, and he said David Moyes signed a deal that meant if he finished outside of 6th place, that the severance was only 1 year's, and that could make sense of all our question as to why they gave the contract. If Lambert received a pay rise, but his severance was then cut to 6 months or a year, depending on. So effectively, you're saving money by giving him a pay rise on the basis if he fails on the pitch, your total liability is less, and if he succeeds on the pitch, well, you're going to make the more money in revenue, etc. But no, they've been poor, haven't they? They've been inconsistent. Points per game, I'm afraid people don't like points per game. It doesn't lie, does it?
No, that's true. That's true.
You know, so it's just very, very difficult, and you just start to look at next season and think, I would have thought, and I don't like myself for saying it, that we'll be at some kind of advantage, because I can see a few. Remember when Rotherham had Warnock, survived and just took the money out and were just terrible, and you know, when teams finish with 20 points, I think there might be some teams have massive budget cuts and are going to be putting out players who aren't ready to be there but want to save their clubs. I think there might be some whipping boys in League One next season.
It's a real shame, and we keep reading these, you know, damning reports and owners coming out and saying that clubs just are not going to survive this time. You know, loans will have to be repaid. You know, wages can only be deferred for a certain amount of time. I think it was the Huddersfield owner the other day came out and he was basically, you know, that reading wasn't pretty. I've heard someone on TalkSport yesterday say that he thinks 40 to 50 clubs will go out of business at some point. It's not fair what has happened, and unfortunately, someone has to be making the decisions at the top, and whatever them decisions may be, it's going to annoy some people.
Jack, do I want my club to die, or me put out 16-year-old kids on 200 quid a week? I'm going to put the 16-year-old kids out, take the massive relegation. You know, we saw the Bolton results at the start of the season. I just wonder whether, without Premier League bailout, and then you get into debate of why should the Premier League bail out clubs in the EFL when we have Mr. Chansiri and Mr. Morris, and you know, those type of situations where they've spent lots and lots of money already. But you do have to worry that you could get I mean, League One's already kind of uneven. There's already the haves and have-nots, and without patronising these clubs, look at a Sunderland compared to an AFC Wimbledon. It's like a Premier League club and a fourth or fifth tier club outperforming their size. So, you could get, people talk about integrity. You could get three teams with 90 plus points and three teams with under 20 points next season. But I'd rather they scored 19 points than they went out of business.
Massively. And I think it just goes to show, doesn't it, the past few months, even the most powerful businesses and powerful football clubs, when you strip them back, are actually quite fragile, and bad things can happen.
Anyone's fragile if you take all their revenue away, Jack.
Yeah, that's very true.
Even Mr. Amazon would be.
Well, yes, but he's Mr. Bezos.
He's doing okay, isn't he?
Yeah, he's doing all right. He's doing all right, that man. And you know what? I'm not surprised. The amount of nonsense I've ordered off Amazon in the past 2 months. What have I got? I've got a little bag for under my saddle on my bike coming today. I don't really need it. I just thought, you know, I can put a spare inner tube in there or something. It might look snazzy.
You got some rattan garden furniture that also needed building. Yes.
How's the building process?
Awful, absolutely awful. Well, I mean, look at the state of me. Look, do I look like a manly DIY man? My missus is better at it than me, but she adds the instructions, and then I'm no good with a screwdriver or a spanner, am I? I'm a blooming musician and, you know, camp weirdo. So it was dreadful, but we didn't fall out, Jack. You quite like it, don't you? The whole stuff.
No, I don't like it.
I think you're better at it than me, though.
The last bit of DIY I did, I was putting a radiator cover together. You know, they just make radiators look slightly nicer, and I'd put one together in the lounge, but we'd ordered a different design one for the hallway. And it's smaller, so I thought, this will be easy. So I put on your podcast with Kieran Maguire. I thought, it's an hour and 10 minutes long. I'll easily be finished in this time. You know, I could probably knock up, you know, enough for the whole of the village. It was actually a lot tougher. And I got to a point where I had to pause you and Kieran because the noise was just, you know, it was confusing, man. I didn't know which bits went in where. Kieran
could put you off most things. And we do acknowledge where we're having this slightly facetious chat that many people in this lockdown have had worse problems than building flat pack furniture. But we're just trying to bring a little bit of lightness here, aren't we, Jack? Hey?
Definitely. Let's get a question from Elliot Waterfield. He says, when games are started again, do you believe fans will congregate at the stadiums to support their teams?
Hopefully not. If they're told it's illegal and they're told, by their clubs not to do it, then no. Why would they? And surely you're putting yourself in danger of catching the virus if you do that. It's been annoying you, Jack, that suggestion that football fans are so dumb that, and I know people quote the PSG example, but we didn't know a lot about how this virus spread when the PSG fans congregated. So I would hope that, without being too heavy-handed, that the police and the football authorities would say, support your team, watch on the TV, do not come outside the games. We're going to have to deploy some police. You'll be arrested if you congregate. Go away, stay home, and we might get this free-to-air nonsense term, but we might get some games on the BBC or the other terrestrial channels. What do you think?
Well, I keep seeing people suggesting this, and I don't get the point of it. Like, you can't see the pictures at the majority of sort of Premier League grounds. So what's the point in congregating? What, to hear like Timu Pukki kind of scream when he blazes one wide?
Nice noise of the net, Jack, that you talked about.
I'm sure it sounds better on the television. The one alternative for Norwich fans, you could maybe book a room in the Holiday Inn and watch it out of the window. But I don't know if hotels will be open.
That's interesting.
Well, it's a possibility, isn't it? If you're that desperate to watch it.
That could be the one place in the Premier League you could see Premier League football. How many rooms view the pitch there?
There's quite a few. I think there's probably 20 odd.
And can you see surely the scoreboard and stuff's in the way, isn't it?
Yeah, oh, that's a good point, actually. Yeah,
they'll angle it right round as well, won't they, to block it all off? That's a good point. There must be other places. You always see people, if you're at Charlton, and I mean it's literally called the Valley, and there's the tower blocks, isn't there?
Yes.
You can see in bits and bobs from there, can't you? I remember West Ham as well.
That's a good question for the comment section. What grounds what would have the best viewing facilities when you're not in the ground? Like, what grounds could actually work? We're not condoning going and standing outside.
Blackburn on the Hill. Remember the Man City fans on the hill at Blackburn years ago? What I've been saying, Jack, is if it's safe and I run Leeds United and they play on, I'm opening the hospitality boxes, golden ticket. You could be one of 100 people if you can safely be in hospitality. I bet even if they said one person per box, you'd get enough Leeds fans who'd pay 10 grand or something to watch the game that got them. It'd be interesting to see if things like that happen, whether they will say, look, hospitality boxes. I know you'll get normal fans saying, oh, if we can't come in, but do you want your clubs to make any money or not? And I think they'll...
Uproar.
Uproar. What about the cottage in Fulham as well? Open that up on the corner there, can't you?
That would be a good. I'm sure the commercial teams at Norwich are thinking of that. A Delia pie, some chips, and a hospitality box for $5,000, and there'll be people lapping that up.
Did you watch from behind the glass at Norwich? Or I know the rules say you can't, but I'm sure these are exception times. We'll see. I mean, we're being a little bit facetious, but if you want to get people into grounds, then surely the safest places are the hospitality boxes.
Shops are reopening, then there's surely nothing to say that you can't reopen things. I don't know. That's a. You can tell you've got a business mind, Mr.
Why am I not richer then?
Yeah, with shirts like that, I think people will be questioning and saying you are.
It's not Dolce and Gabbana. Honestly, I've been asked. It's not. No, it's like H&M or something. Well, I'll counter that with, why am I building my own rattan? I'm not doing my own stapling.
Joel Hansen asks, will the current pandemic affect the ever-rising market prices, and how will that impact upon both Norwich and Ipswich? Who benefits? That's a really good question. They were saying yesterday, I was listening to a podcast, and they said it's going to be really interesting to see who makes the first big money signing, like that 50-60 million pound. Well, that's good value in the current market, isn't it? But multi-millions of pounds. Because that, again, will attract criticism from the people who are saying, well, you can afford £60 million on a player, but you were furloughing your staff. So who's going to be bold enough to go out there and make them big signings at the moment?
Well, football clubs have never been afraid to annoy the little people, have they? So I'm sure if they see an opportunity from a Norwich and an Ipswich point of view, without smacking completely of self-interest, it should be. I would think both clubs are in a position, and Norwich's decision now to not blow a load of their TV money at the start of the season is looking smarter with hindsight now as well, because they haven't got a whole load of liabilities that they're now going to lose a load of money on in a depressed market. You would think that whichever way, that Norwich should be in a strong position. If they stay up, then 100 million TV money, brilliant. Bob's your uncle. If they go down, parachute money and the ability to sell, God, I'm sure Norwich, even in a depressed market, could raise a fair amount of money. And then from an Ipswich point of view, it sounds very selfish and very mean, but we've just said Ipswich are in a division with Rochdale, AFC, Wimbledon, small clubs without patronising them. And if I open up this booklet here, Jack, you might see their owner in there. So you think Ipswich would be okay. The only both Ipswich and Norwich are very secure on contracts, and Norwich exceptionally so. I've seen a graphic that one of your boys did of all the contracts. So they've both got biggish squads without. That's good for Norwich, but I think bad for Ipswich, because Norwich's squad looks well protected, whereas Ipswich's looks a bit bloated, and you might have to take a hit on a couple. Will Keane, that looks like it's done, and Danny Rowe and a few players like that. But I think both of those clubs would be in a position where others in the league they're in will be worse off. What's your view?
Yeah, Matt, I think from my, simple thinking brain, I think especially for Norwich and Ipswich, everything's sort of relative. So for Norwich's examples, we might lose a bit of money on the sales of Buendia and Godfrey, whoever we decide to sell. But then hopefully that will even out with, the players we're looking to sign being either easier to attract to Norwich, or it will cost us less money. And like you say, Norwich are run incredibly well. So, finances aren't a massive worry. I mean, every club will take a significant hit, but Norwich are in a place where we can handle that hit and take the blows. You look at an Aston Villa or someone who, like you say, have spent considerable amounts of money to try and stay in the Premier League. If for whatever reason that doesn't work and they then go down and then they have to sell their assets for deflated prices, you're suddenly in a situation that you didn't really expect or want to be in. So, yeah, I think, I know less about sort of Ipswich's finances than Norwich, but I think we're both in a fairly okay position, I think.
Are we now contractually obliged to call, in the same way Ipswich became Roy Keane's Ipswich, are Norwich now self-funded Norwich City?
Oh,
because every time I hear Daniel Farker or Stuart Webber, they really hammer home that. It's us and Burnley. We're flying the flag here. I mock gently, but I do have admiration. That's the only issue Norwich would have against an Aston Villa or somebody else coming down is, yes, Villa, some would say, exploited the loan system, given we've seen the wage bills, and then literally had to spend 100 million just to have the team that got them promoted, didn't they? But these big clubs always find a way, don't they? They were in a perilous state.
I know.
Villa under Dr. Tony, and investors will always come in. Always come in for those big clubs. They just wave that thing on the stand of the European Cup winning goal, and someone gets misty-eyed and buys it, don't they?
I've never quite understood that term, self-funded. Like, someone's always funded by.
I know.
Never quite understand it. I don't know.
I think they're just pointing to the fact that they're one of the few teams without a massively wealthy owner who, I mean, let's be honest, where would Ipswich be without the £6 million check that Marcus Evans writes every year? And lots of Ipswich fans wouldn't be happy because, yes, Marcus Evans' operational decisions have been pretty hapless at times. But where would they be without, some people would argue that sometimes the extra finance is a noose around your neck. And you've said about Norwich before, you spent way better when you had no money.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there was no Pritchard or
Naismith.
Wiltshire, Naismith, Van Wolfswinkel, whoever then. So who knows? But my general argument is, would you rather have a 6 million bailout every year or not? Give me the 6 million quid,
Of course. Okay, one last question from the YouTube comment section. Just give me 2 minutes to read this because it's quite a long one. And I appreciate James Kewin putting in such an effort with this. So he asks, why, if we have no vaccine until 2021, do we not just pick everything back up again on the same date it ended, but a year later? I mentioned this to a mate and he said contracts, but to me, everyone agrees this is a crappy situation. I'm sure if you give all players, a 1-year extension or reduced salary extension, they would say they would rather that than the idea of playing with silly rules in June. All leagues Europe-wide should and could follow the same pattern. So then it's a case of everything waits 1 year, just like the war times. We just call the season 2019 to 2021, and we have none of these arguments. Also, one final point, the money men, such as the Sky people in the world, would simply give the money back or pause rights payments until it starts again. Surely they would be open to this as well. It just seems like the sensible option, safe, and more importantly, fair. Thoughts?
I fully respect the spirit of the question from James, wasn't it? But big business just doesn't work like that. I'm afraid it really doesn't. It's just how many businesses can afford to just stop? And unfortunately, what would happen if you do that is either the businesses will go bust because you can't mothball a football club. You still need to pay the groundsman. Social media team still needs to work. The players still need to train to stay fit for when they do come. So it would either be the clubs would go bust or the employees would go bankrupt. And when I saw the question, I thought about Todd Cantwell. I thought, right, if I'm Todd Cantwell, I'm in and around the team. I've done really, really well. And did he get a new contract? I'm sure he must have had a new contract.
Yeah, he has
Right.
Yeah.
So Todd Cantwell, in the last year, his pay's probably gone up by 400%. That's a reasonable guess. So if I'm Todd Cantwell, I'm probably going to go and buy my mum a house, or buy myself a house, thinking, I've done it. I've worked my arse off. I'm a Premier League footballer. I've done really well. I can do this. Todd Cantwell will go bankrupt if, do you know what I mean? He's just, presumably bought a huge house and he's not going to be able to work for a year. I know that's a kind of spurious example, but that's what we're talking about.
Like, I thought you were going to go on a slightly different track then. I was thinking the other day, footballers have very short careers. If you're a Todd Cantwell and you're in the form,
you won't agree to stop.
Do you want to take over a year out of your career? No, of course you don't. You want to just keep trundling on. And look, I get the spirit there. And in an ideal world, if no one was to be
brilliant,
that would be fantastic. But like you say, it's not just the players that clubs need to keep, on the books. They've got massive financial teams. They've got, loads and loads of employees, more than we realise. And by that point, the furlough scheme will be over. Like, clubs will just make everyone redundant, and then you're in an even bigger mess. So, yeah, James, that's a fantastic comment, and well done for writing out. I'm sure it took you a little while, but yeah, like you say, I don't think that kind of the spirit's there. But
it would be great. But now, we were talking about evidence earlier. We're collecting evidence to say that it could be safe. So, obviously the silly rules he's talking about is, masks on the subs bench, 5 subs now, all of this other business that's going on, miking up the dugouts or whatever. But Mourinho swearing.
I thought it was going to be more kind of. Would take more emphasis away from the pitch, but I don't really care if the subs are wearing masks. Like the standard of play seems similar. Yes, they can't hug when they celebrate and stuff, and it all seems slightly robotic. But it hasn't affected me watching that as much as I thought it would. I don't know about you.
There's a lot of muscle memory, isn't it? These guys, they repeat these drills day in, day out. Some of them for 15, 20 years. When they get on the pitch, like you said, they know what they're doing. They're elite sportsmen. And I think you made a really good point. Some argue that the likes of you and I, mere mortals, we can't relate to the level of competitiveness and the drive that these people have. And I'll reference the Michael Jordan documentary and all of that coming out. You're right.
Yeah.
You don't tell people with massive drive and determination who want to crush you in every game that they play against you. You can't tell them they're going to stop for a year. They just won't.
Definitely. Okay, let's end on maybe a happier note for me and a slightly less happier note for you. It was 5 years ago yesterday since our playoff final success over Middlesbrough. Playoff final memories. What's your kind of what pops to your mind when you think of the playoffs?
I was just really interested in the two sides of the Ipswich-Norwich divide and how they would view the playoffs, really, because from my outsider's view on Norwich, obviously there was the final defeat, wasn't there, under Nigel Worthington against Birmingham. And then, I mean, us Ipswich fans always have this idea that if Norwich even get the slightest sniff of promotion, they win the league and they go up, But and then what I would consider a very different experience, whereby Norwich were up in the Premier League for 3 years, was it? Or,
3 years, yeah.
Yeah, and then come down and we get the Neil Adams stroke Alex Neil season.
Yeah.
And there's this, it must be just a very, very different feeling. There's this sense of, right, they've kept a lot of the Premier League players. They've backed the club with very good wages. They've changed the manager. There must have been a bit of a sense for you guys that season of, right, we should be at an advantage here, as opposed, and I mean, it was done in about 10, 15 minutes. The
easiest win, yeah.
The final. Obviously, there's the semi-final, which we won't mention, but got through that just about. But just I wanted your kind of thoughts on it compared to my experience in the early 90s, late 90s, excuse me, of semi-final lose, semi-final lose, semi-final lose. This massive, huge chase and this glorious day in the final. How do you compare and contrast the kind of the two situations there, and how we can look back at these anniversaries?
Yeah, from a Norwich point of view, that playoff success from the semi-finals that I know you want to kind of gloss over and the final, it was just perfect for Norwich. And I think people forget the final we had against Middlesbrough. People remember it for just being over in kind of 15 minutes, basically.
You played really well, didn't you?
Yeah, we played some fantastic football, but we'd lost to Middlesbrough at home and away that season. We got crushed 4-0 away from home at the Riverside. It was a really cold Tuesday night, and Patrick Bamford scored a couple of goals that night. And then
he's never far away, is he?
No, he's not. And then we played Middlesbrough. I think it was the second or third last game of the season, and they won. I think it was Alex Tete own goal. It was 1-0. It was very scrappy. And then when we got to the final, we were like, Middlesbrough were a very good side that season. They had some, it was a really well-drilled squad, and we didn't expect for it to be that easy. But having heard the stories from the players that day, they knew that they were going to win that. The Middlesbrough coach turned up late. Their preparation was poor. On the flip side, Norwich went into that off the back of a great semi-final win. The preparation was spot on. Russell Martin got them players, in a really good place. And the football we played that second half of that season was phenomenal, because we dropped down to, I think, 14th place under Neil Adams at a point in that championship season. So that was brilliant. But then you get back into the Premier League with a very similar squad to the one that got relegated. And then once we got relegated again, it was like, well, actually, did we need a bit more time to just rebuild, get rid of some of the more experienced players on the higher wages who maybe weren't up for the fight of the Premier League again? So I think in some ways, bouncing straight back can be damaging in a sense. And and we've had questions before in terms of, is it beneficial to kind of stay in the lower divisions longer to then go through that rebuilding process? And we've seen it with Norwich and Farker and Webber. We didn't bounce back back first time. And then we had time to rebuild. And I think we've probably come back in a stronger position, both on the pitch and financially. So I guess the question for Ipswich fans is your time in League One at the moment one of a beneficial one, and is there time to regroup and get rid of dead wood and set new targets to then come back arguably stronger?
That's the hope, isn't it? That's the potential upside, that you go down, you recalibrate, you retool, and you have a run at it. It's just so fascinating to me how different the two promotions are, and I'd be so interested to get a view whether Norwich fans would take the Ipswich way of failing, but then you get a 5th place finish the next season because the team you've built that's so good, or whether Ipswich fans would take the Norwich way of, look, just get up, and then, as you've just said, that Alex Neil didn't have time to figure anything out, and then immediately he's thrown into very, very hard games in the Premier League, and then you throw in the fact that Mick Mills kind of puts this really well on Radio Suffolk, that at the time Norwich did it, this just get up thing is so important because it sets your club money wise for years afterwards. And it's what he said about Marcus Evans. 1 promotion to the Premier League, Marcus Evans' debts are wiped.
Yeah.
11 years of debts. I'd just be interested. Would a Norwich fan swap to get that one glorious season, but then the crash afterwards? Would an Ipswich fan swap and bounce to be financially stable? It's so interesting.
I don't think anyone would ever swap that feeling of winning a playoff, final. I wasn't there in 2002. I was too young, but I can imagine that was as much of a crushing blow as it is. You go the whole season, which leads to one game, and
extra time as well.
And extra time,
30-minute shootout for promotion.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's that must be such a blow that's really hard to get over, and we arguably didn't get over it for a couple of seasons, and then that feeling of success in 2015 for me and all Norwich fans was just so special. And yes, the season that then followed wasn't great, and the squad we had, it was hard to connect to them in a certain way. But I don't think we'd ever swap that for sure. I mean, look how Ipswich could be if you would have scraped past us and then had that Middlesbrough side in the final. I think you would have fancied yourselves to a certain extent.
Pat Bamford would have scored off his arse in the 91st minute.
There's a stat, one of my favourite stats in recent times. Patrick Bamford failed to record a touch in our half in that whole game.
You can find some. I did a video on Pat Bamford, and his record. He's a very unlucky player, let's just say, with relegations and losing. Yeah. He's lost in the playoffs, and he came on in the final for Derby when Zamora scored at the end. He lost in the final against you. He lost in the semis last year, and I think in the season in between he was relegated with Borough. He's
did a nice job. He just seems like he was rubbish for us, and he just seemed really
he's dead. No, and he got relegated for you as well, didn't he? That's another one on the thing.
He did actually. He did.
But no, I'm just really interested because Ipswich fans, really, that's all we've got as a great memory for the last, well, it's going to be 20 years in a few days. That's the thing. It's, in my supporting time, I saw the team win at Wembley and then finish 5th in the Premier League and get into Europe. And I'm just interested to see, obviously, sadly for the rivalry, Norwich have had four promotions since then. 1 under Worthington, 2 under Lambert, and then
Farker.
No, 1 under Neil and 1 under Farker. 5. Yeah. But promotions to the Premier League. 4 indeed. So it just how it all sits kind of interests me, and all these anniversaries are coming up now, aren't they?
Massively. I think that's probably all for this week, isn't it? I mean, we've got more football. I think there's Polish football on on free terrestrial television this weekend.
Sound like Paul Merson on our Sky Bet app. It's like, what football can I find? But it's Dortmund and Bayern tonight, isn't it? Which will be and that'll be an interesting one, Jack. Is can you have this super match? And will it still carry the same gravitas? They're in a title race. They're first and second, and that maybe some of these games that Norwich will have coming up, these sort of to get out of the bottom three shootouts that they would with fans there. So that'll be an interesting watch tonight.
Massively, and I'm looking forward to it. And sport will hopefully be gradually returning from now on. So that's good. What are you up to? Putting more furniture together? Or
that's tremendous. I've got to write some school reports. Hopefully we'll get some news, and I'll be able to get a kind of news video up at some point, because other than Mr. Cummings, it was very quiet yesterday on the news front. But we've got the votes coming through. I'm just readying myself to go back to work. But we should still be able to. The plan is on these cross-channel chats that while there's no actual football, we'll keep them going. So we should be able to fit more in as we come up to June the 12th, June the 19th, June the 26th, whatever it moves back to. But and then hopefully certainly from your point of view, you're going to go again.
Definitely, all good to go again. Well, Ben, thanks very much, mate. And if you've enjoyed watching, please do hit the like button and subscribe, and feel free to let us know what you thought of the video down in the comments section below. See you again next week.